So, without further ado, neither of you gentlemen, Dave or Frank, need much of an introduction. I guess just take it away, whatever you are planning to
Yeah.
present. I'm excited to hear.
What's your preference, Frank? Did you want me to go ahead and go and then, or did you want to go? You're muted, Frank.
I'm happy either way. I think
Okay, I'll go
there
ahead
may
and run through because then you can follow up with the one piece that we couldn't touch at the county level, and that's the energy stuff. So I could go through that. Let me share screen real quick here. Which one am I looking at? That should, can you now see my slides?
Yes, but we also see the left
Okay,
side. Yeah.
that's what you want. Okay. What I was going to try to get through tonight, as quickly as I can, is just give one quick slide about what data centers are. I think most of this group probably knows, so I don't want to spend much time there. I'm going to then talk about what some of the concerns are and how we've tried to address some of those in Newcastle County. The one that Frank can cover after this is the big elephant in the room, and that's how to deal with energy. We just don't have authority over energy at the county level. I do want to go over at least one slide in a discussion of the economic cost and benefits and just a discussion of what's in it for Delaware. Looking at those numbers, I work very closely with my colleagues from Loudoun County who have a much different tax structure and other structures that we don't have in Delaware. It's why they benefit, and it's an example we often use. And then I'm going to mention what we are trying to do. I've got an ordinance in now to try and require concurrency for electricity. That's basically going to require that Public Service Commission utilities provide us proof that the energy and infrastructure will be in place before any data center could be approved in Newcastle County. Real quickly, and I think Dee was going to send out the NACO information primer on data centers. But what data centers are is just large boxes that house a lot of the computer and networking equipment and chips to be able to process data information and push it back out again. The big difference is they've been around for a long time. We have about 8 of them already in Newcastle County, but they're smaller, they're banks, they're not dealing with the generative AI type of stuff. So they're hyperscale, so they use much, much more energy, much, much more water, and are just huge. So they're very different and something we hadn't really thought about or planned for in Newcastle County until recently. Why does it matter? Well, we're seeing this surge. And I could tell you over the last 2 years, I don't know of any county across the nation. I serve on the board of directors for NACO that isn't either dealing with them or feeling the threat that they're coming and trying to figure out how to handle these data centers because there's just a surging demand. They're clearly a new land use that is beyond anything we've dealt with before in terms of its impacts and other stuff. And across the board, we knew, at least a number of us on council knew that we had to move pretty quickly and update our zoning. We couldn't really wait for even the state to pass what they're going to hopefully do with energy and other stuff, because we are required by law once those applications come in to push through. Unfortunately, the applications that were already in had to be grandfathered in. I tried to not have that occur, but we got enough pushback from a few of our council members that I couldn't do that. So what do we look at? There's a big issue with land use compatibility. These are large 24/7 operations. They make noise. They use a lot of water. They're unsightly. And they really are an industrial use. And I think that coastal zone, as they documented, particularly larger ones, are definitely heavy industrial uses. The picture you see here is just one of them we visited down in Loudoun County. They're pretty ominous. They make a lot of noise. Noise pollution is a big issue. Light pollution can be an issue. We addressed both of those. I'll talk about that. Air emissions is a problem. That's largely because they use the backup generators, and some of them even have their own power generation, which is something I'm sure they're going to be visiting in Delaware. That has proven to be a real nightmare for a few sites in Loudoun County, where they've come in and kind of twisted their accessory use permissions of generators to put gas turbines in, and the noise coming from them is even far worse than the data center. So it's been a real problem in terms of the siting, but I think we've closed that loophole in Newcastle County with our new regs. Water use can be a big issue. I'll talk about what we did about that. And of course, the energy use is a big issue, and we are going to try, I think, to thread a needle and have concurrency requirements and hope that the state passes some stricter energy use constraints. So what's the ordinance that we passed do? Well, it restricts data centers to only industrial or heavy industrial zones. There's one area that's extractive use, but it's really treated as an industrial site, and probably should be rezoned to that. It requires special use approval. So these are not by right plans. So they still have to go through the Board of Adjustments. And if the public or if the county sees an issue that wasn't in our regs or our zoning code to deal with it, we can add case-specific conditions. If we have reason to think a noise is going to carry more or to do other things, we can add those restrictions to these sites. And I first did that in, for all of our coastal zone permitting and heavy industrial permitting when we passed the ordinance for the landfill, and we expanded it to be included for data centers as well. We do have setbacks required, minimum of 1,000 feet, unless they can prove that they are doing adequate noise protections through modeling and studies and background measurements, and also that they can prove they're not going to have an aesthetic impact from a nearby community. So it's a little bit of a high bar for them to get the 500 feet is possible. I didn't want to make that compromise, but I needed to get something through. But it's still probably the strongest setbacks anywhere in the nation right now. It does require noise studies and mitigation. We didn't get the low frequency, we got the high frequency, but with the setbacks, hopefully we'll mitigate a lot of it. We do have environmental and operational standards now. Those include things like lighting, closed loop cooling, traffic, other things. The closed loop cooling was the big one to reduce the water use. We do require decommissioning plans and financial assurances. That way, if the technology changes over the next few years, we won't be stuck with millions of square feet of these buildings. They have to basically provide the funds and financial insurance to be able to decommission them, take them down and clean them up so the land can be either taken back to its original use or redeveloped. And it also includes everything that we have under Article 10. That as Newcastle County for a long term has had 100% protection of wetlands, forest protections, a really strong resource protections, and all of them carry with it. This to just give you an idea. There are a few very small, I don't know if you could see my cursor moving around, but around Delaware City, we have the gray shaded areas, which are heavy industry, some up around the Port of Wilmington, Edgemore, up around Claymont, and then only one site south of the canal, which would be the Summit Airport. They're the only industrial and heavy industrial zoning parcels in the county. So we have really restricted it, and we did that for two reasons. One of which is they're the only places that are likely to have power lines, high voltage power lines near them. And also we tend to already, not always, we have environmental justice issues at some of these sites because the community's nearby. But the idea is most of our industrial stuff tries to be a little further. And we can still put additional restrictions if they're can be warranted and documented. For the water, we did put a requirement in for closed loop cooling systems. That tends to reduce the total water usage by anywhere from 70 to 95%. It also reduces the energy use significantly, 25% or more. If you do that, that can be enhanced with refrigerants and glycol loops as long as they manage the material when they flush them well. We hope they'll move to a lot more liquid cooling of chips by direct contact. You see these little copper boxes that are up against the chips. They don't actually submerge them. They had real problems with submersible of chips because that's when you start to pick up PFAS and metals and other things. And then you've got to deal with that in your wastewater from it if they are doing direct cooling. Then there are other technologies with rack level radiations and fan cooling and the one exception to closed loop is they could use reclaimed or treated wastewater. The only place that could occur would be if they decided not to expand the port to Edgemore and wanted to put a data center there instead. Next, because that shares a boundary with the old Calpine site that has space for more generation and is also on the other side of that. We have the Wilmington wastewater facility, which would be able to provide about 10 times more water than they could probably use. Okay, we talked about the required setbacks. I'm not going to go into this too much detail, but this just gives you, if you look at the down on the right side of this photo, the size of the little cranes and trucks there. These buildings are just huge. They're monstrosities, depending on how they situate their cooling systems and racks on the roof. A lot of them that carries a long way. There were a few that we had from Digital Reality that had almost like an octagonal building with all of those facilities in the middle. That tended to actually project the noise up, and it was amazing the difference in noise when you got near them. But either way, we've got noise controls and setbacks. That's really important if you understand the basically the natural laws of physics of sound, because each time you double a distance you away from the sound source, you reduce your noise by about 6 decibels. And for the most case, we can get down to our target, which is what we expect in communities of 55 decibels, probably at about 500 feet. At 1,000 feet, we're starting to get both dBA and dBc, the high and the low frequency, although the low frequency can travel. And for people that have, sensitivities or post-traumatic stress syndrome and things like that, we know that low frequency noise, there's data that says it affects them. So that was not perfect, but it was probably better than we have anywhere else in the country right now. Decommissioning, I've already talked about this. They have to provide the financial security and some bonding and be able to deal with that directly if they do close, and in a process of which we push them through. We do this actually for rural solar, and I just carried it over to this scale just because I don't know what the heck we'd do with these giant buildings if we didn't. I do want to talk a little bit about the finances because we've heard a lot about how great these are and how rich Loudoun County is. So I sat down very close with Mike Turner, vice chair of the supervisors in Loudoun County, very close friend of mine. We served together on the board of directors for National Association of Counties, and we began to look at it. And this was the numbers we have. I've got a short white paper. It's only about 5 or 6 pages. If people want it, you can send me an email, I'll send it to. But we don't have a business tangible personal property tax, which is where they get the majority of their funds. That's going to be an order of magnitude, or at least a tenfold reduction in the amount of money Delaware would get from these. For real estate, for land and buildings, it's going to be about the same amount. Loudoun County's is a little different based than ours, based on their property values. But after looking at what they would get for the acreage, it's about the same. Out of that, we calculated for Newcastle County for the 1.2 gigawatt project Washington. The county's only going to get not quite $800,000 a year out of it. I mean, that's really a minuscule amount of money. The school districts get about $2 million out of it. So there's really not much in the way of an economic benefit for this data center in Delaware. And when you consider the energy stuff, it's a difficulty. We don't have a machinery or tool tax like they have in other areas. We do not have a sales tax, which is where they pick up a lot of their funds and also capture a little more of the construction trades during that short period. We don't get any of that. So really, if you look at those numbers, we're talking about $2 to $5 million in Delaware. I did calculate also the income tax for including the workers, and it's not a whole lot more. That's in the white paper. So I think I don't know how else to put it other than Anybody that thinks we're going to get a whole lot of money out this has had a lot of smoke blown up their ass. It's just not there. It's not to be found, and we've gone through it in detail. We also have a very unique disadvantage on the PGM that causes excessive congestion costs. I think I'll let Frank talk more about that. He's been tracking that. And a very high energy exposure. We import about 60% of our energy. So we are really, really at risk. And if you do the cost benefit analysis, um, the expected cost of ratepayers are likely to be much, much higher than the revenues that we get. Hopefully, a lot of that can be buffered if some of the legislation passed, but I still find it hard to believe that you're going to have a net gain from a data center to whatever energy we get that you don't capture even with the tariffs and other stuff. It's just going to be, looking at the numbers, it's going to be really hard to justify. One of the things we are trying to do that I think we need to do, and I started this one, I wasn't positive and too sure what's going to come out of the General Assembly, is that we just want to do what we can to invoke concurrency and to have concurrency in a requirement that basically says you have to have proof that the energy and that the infrastructure will be in place before you can get issued a permit to build a data center in Newcastle County. This is just adding to what we already have for roads. We do it for water. You have to go to the Public Service Commission and the water purveyor, whether that's Artesian or United, and get a certification and provide all that to us that the water's available. Have to do it for sewer. You used to have to do it for schools, although the General Assembly preempted Newcastle County's code so that if they pay the VSA, pays about 46, 47% of the cost of schools. We are required by state law to approve that plan. Hopefully they will repeal that because I'd like to be able to say no, particularly in Appoquinimink School District. But this is all about ensuring development only occurs when adequate electric capacity is available. We set that demand at 25 megawatts. I did have a discussion. I know the Public Service Commission wants us to transfer the responsibility from utilities to them, which I'm fine with. They want me to model as much as I can or mimic as much as I can what they have on hold now for the tariffs. And they have decided to go at 50 megawatts. That's 3 times the amount of energy I need for my entire growth zone in Newcastle County, and I'm not comfortable with that. So I think for at least the first pass, we're going to keep it at 25 megawatts because it's a heck of a lot of energy. Those that don't know what concurrency is, it's just a planning tool, requires that the essential services are in place before, or that you have a guarantee that they will be concurrent with the development. This is important because right now in Data Center Alley in Loudoun County, there are several data centers sitting there who have been told that are already built, they're already constructed, and they are waiting and been told it'll be 8 to 15 years before they get energy. And I just don't want big buildings sitting for that long. So that's one of the reasons we're doing it. We don't want to let it overburden it. So that's kind of where we are. It basically right now applies to all developments with 25 megawatts of demand or higher. There's still an ordinance that's going through the process. It just went through the process and it'll go to the planning board with the amendment that was requested by Public Service Commission. But they have to prove to us they have the available capacity, needed infrastructure upgrades, and the exact timeline for that before we could get development approvals through. And with that, do you want to just wait and take questions at the end? Which is probably the best.
Yeah, probably. We'll let Frank.
Okay, how do I shut down my slides now? End slideshow. There you go.
Hey, Dave, you
Yeah.
just might want to mention, I think your 26046 comes up to the public meeting of the planning board on July 7th. Is that right?
I believe it is coming, and I've got to get a ordinance. I just lost
I'll
my.
put the link in there, Neil. Yes, it's the 7th at 7 p.m.
Correct. And so for those who are inclined to comment publicly for or against, that's your kind of first opportunity, I would think.
Yeah, and this is well, I'm not sure, just in my view, from the county perspective, um, I'm not, positive that tariffs will be enough, just adjusting the energy. I want to guarantee that the power is going to be there from the county's perspective, but, we'll see where we end up with that.
Yeah, that's why, you're going to want support for that, is all I'm saying.
It will be substitute one, because I'm going to adjust it to match request for the Public Service Commission to have them be the ones certifying.
Got it. Thanks.
A very brief question. We came in 4 minutes before the show and apparently it had been going on for a little bit. Could you briefly recap the status of your ordinance?
So it was introduced, and what we do after introduction, it's going through the state's preliminary land use service. They had no comments there. The Public Service Commission wasn't there. I then did speak with Public Service Commission, DP&L, and some other utilities, and was asked that we move the responsibility of it over to Public Service Commission, which is fine. And the next step will be, it will go before the planning board for a public hearing. Based on that public hearing, we'll take comments, and if they recommend it, sometimes they recommend it with changes and things like that. We will address those, and then once they have the report, it will come back before council.
If we could get on some sort of email blast updating us how we can help and how the process is working, I would be interested.
Dee, do you have a way to do it for this group? If not, you can sign up for my newsletter, and I'll be putting it out of that. If you just go to the county's website and go to Councilman Carter's page, on the right-hand side, there's a spot you can sign up on my newsletter. And aside from that, for the green drinks, if
We have a list that we
you
can
have a
send.
list, okay, then Dee and Jill can handle that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, are we good? Can everyone see the slides?
Looks
Yep.
good.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to be a little bit different. I am not just going to focus on the bill I have. I just want to bring up some of the issues and discuss them, and I'll talk a little bit about what's in the bill. So let's see, how do I advance my slides on this and that? Sorry. So there's a few important,
He's a medical doctor.
pardon?
Sorry.
Okay. So there's a few important players and terms that you might want to become familiar with. PJM, it's stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland. This was a transmission organization that started many decades ago. Actually, Delaware was part of it from the beginning as well, but I guess we just didn't merit an initial in the title. It's a non-for-profit membership organization that maintains the interstate transmission in 13 states. Most of the members are energy generators and utilities. It is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. Delmarva owns the transmission lines that are within the state. It also owns the distribution lines. I'm going to try to go to a slightly different view. Sorry about that. Um, I'm only making things worse here. Okay. Now you can see my slides, but I can't, I think, which is not a good situation to be in. Can you still see my slides?
Yep. We see them.
Okay, because I do not right now. All right. But anyway,
This is
then I'll
still a
just,
few important players slide.
yeah, that's okay. I'm just gonna keep going. So Delmarva owns the transmission lines and the distribution lines. but it doesn't generate electricity. They own the wires and maintain them, and they contract for energy from merchant generators that is then delivered via their transmission lines, which is our grid in Delaware. In Delaware, we also have the Delaware Electric Cooperative and the Municipal Electric Cooperatives. They own the distribution lines in their territories. They can produce power or buy it from the grid or other sources. These are monopolies within their service area. They have to say yes to requests for power, and that's something important. They can't say no. Right now, we just passed one thing through the House allowing the electric cooperative to say no, and part of what's in HB 233 will allow Delmarva to say no if they can't come to an appropriate agreement. But right now, they can say you have to wait, but they can't say no unless it will literally cause the lights to go out. It can double or triple your cost of electricity. They cannot say no. And one of the things that is a myth that I run into quite frequently is that it doesn't really matter where a data center is. The cost impacts are all going to be the same. So we should build them here so they don't get built in Pennsylvania because it affects us the same way. Well, if you look at this, you can get this app from PJM. It's called PJM Now. You can get it at the Apple Store or Google Play. And you can look at what the wholesale cost of energy is. It's referred to as the localized marginal price of electricity. And you can see huge differences. At the time this was taken, which was in December, cost of electricity in the Delmarva Peninsula was between $200 and $500, whereas the cost of electricity in Indiana and Ohio was in the $40 to $70 range. So the fact that these big differences exist within various regions lets you know that things are not all the same. Putting something in one location is not the same as putting it in another in terms of how it impacts costs. In September of 25, Bloomberg Technology put out an article where it showed that the wholesale electricity costs as much as 267% more than it did 5 years ago in areas near data centers, and that is being passed on to customers. So it followed a location. If you were near a data center area with data center activity, your electric bills were going up much more than if you were not in an area near a lot of data center activity. And this is just a graphic showing that nearly 3/4 of the nodes, and they're referred to as nodes, but you can think of them as your local electrical substation. So most of them that experienced price increases were within 50 miles of significant data center activity. But there were places where the price of electricity was going down, and they were not located close to data centers. Trying to investigate that, we take a look at this was just randomly looking at Loudoun County, or Loudoun County, I guess, as Dave Carty refers to it. And I just want to say that I had talked with Mr. Wirtz, who's the director of finance there, and absolutely far in excess of 70% of their money comes not from the buildings and grounds, but from the tax on the computer equipment that's in those facilities. But looking at this, what really surprised me, well, there are two things. One, that 90% of the cost here was something called congestion. The energy itself was no different in between the blue nodes, which indicate like maybe negative pricing, in fact, negative pricing for those blue nodes, and others with prices of $406. And this was all based on congestion. Okay. Congestion you can think of as the same way you think about roadway congestion. Wires get congested. You can't easily transfer electricity from point A to point B. So you can't use the electricity from point A. You have to get more expensive electricity from another source and sort of route it to where it's needed. And in terms of things being the same wherever you put a data center, um, if you put something that used up all the available lanes on I-95 in Wilmington, you would create tremendous congestion, havoc, and problems in Delaware, but you wouldn't be causing trouble up in Pennsylvania. On the other hand, if you did that same thing up on the Pennsylvania Turnpike near Harrisburg, you'd be causing a lot of problems up there and not causing problems in Delaware. So the take-home message from this is location matters, and actually it can where the location is can matter at a very discrete level, because if you look back at here, you're talking about huge differences in pricing in very places that are geographically quite close. Okay, so then this is the same type of approach. This was in December 9th of 2025. I was just on my computer that morning and decided to take a look. And again, huge price differences. Again, Delmarva having a much higher price than many of our surrounding areas. And looking at two places, one at Cape May, New Jersey. What you can see is the energy cost is $75.95. The congestion price is 44 cents. At the Cedar Creek substation here in Delaware, the price is $284.29. The energy price is the same. The congestion price is different. So congestion, especially in southern Delaware, is very high, the charges, and it gets shared across everyone. What happens when you take an already congested system and put more big loads on it? You put much more demand. So this is from PJM. I'll just go over the headline at the top. Heavy use of the electricity grid can result in congestion, a condition where the lowest price electricity can't flow freely to a specific area and higher price power is needed to keep the lights on. So congestion occurs when you have a great imbalance between supply and demand locally, and you don't have the transmission capacity to bring other supply into the area. And we, as a peninsula, are not enmeshed in the middle of a grid. We are a peninsula hanging off of a grid. The ability to bring in more transmission is quite limited, and we need to be extraordinarily careful because Delaware is extraordinarily vulnerable to disruptions like this, especially when you have data centers that are requesting 2.1 gigawatts of power in Delaware. And our current average electricity, it's not the maximum that we use. Our average electricity demand in Delaware is about 1.2 gigawatts. So you're looking at almost tripling the average electricity use in the state. And the main supply line we have is a 500 kilovolt line, runs across Newcastle County. The capacity of that is somewhere between 1 and 2 gigawatts. I can't get Delmarva to give me the real number. They say they haven't been given permission to share that. But if you add 2 gigawatts, that completely takes out our major supply, the entire capacity of that major supply line that we all depend on. And that would have devastating cost impacts. So we did a study with Siemens Energy looking at things, and already we have a systemic problem with congestion, especially in the southern part of the state. But those costs get socialized across all the Delmarva customers. So when you have insufficient capacity on the transmission lines to carry the power from where it's produced to where it's being used, you get the congestion. And again, if you lose generation, if you lose transmission lines, or if you increase demand, you drive up congestion. And those are, again, socialized and spread across all ratepayers. So, we have multiple proposed data centers. Adding those data center loads in Delaware will drive up congestion and congestion pricing. And as laws are currently structured, the burden will fall on all Delaware consumers. A recent study commissioned by Jameson Tweedy, the public advocate, shows that Delawareans' electric bills will increase 82% due to these local impacts of data centers under current Delaware law. So what we're trying to do with HB 233 is create a data center bucket where all costs created are captured and paid for by the companies in that bucket. We've included a price margin, a price, trying to think of the name of the test. But anyway, we have a look back to make sure that we are actually capturing the costs. If we're not, then those costs get added back in. So it's difficult to model congestion pricing because where you put it on the grid impacts how much of a problem it's going to cause. So one of the things that's required is in addition to the overall terms of the legislation, is that an electrical service agreement be entered into, and that electrical service agreement, and that would be between Delmarva and the data center, but then that has to be approved by the Public Service Commission. Again, because there are localized impacts depending where on what transmission line you're putting it and where in the state you're putting a data center. We also have changing rules from FERC, Federal Electrical Regulatory Commission, MPJM. The regulatory ground is shifting in real time. There's a new type of auction that PJM is going to have in September. They have a proposal. They're modifying the proposal. I was up at PJM headquarters on Friday, and they are still taking input from stakeholders. And then once they have their proposal finalized, they have to see if FERC will okay it. But this is going to be to backstop procurement auction is what they're calling it. Normally, PJM enters into contracts 3 years ahead to purchase or to agree to have available power. And this is going to be with a 15-year look ahead. So service areas with excess load over production are likely to be the first forced to cut off power. And we really need to protect ourselves. We cannot basically have a target on our back because we have little energy production and a big energy demand. So there's impact of water usage on water prices and supply. So as I said before, if you are a utility with, and this goes for water utilities as well, you have a legal obligation to serve. That means you have to supply the water in your area unless you absolutely cannot do it. And this needs to be looked at, and I'm glad Councilman Carter was talking about that. But this also is going to impact natural gas prices. And we grant these monopolies. They just can't say no, at least under current law. Okay, we talked about cooling fans and low frequency noise. Councilman Carter addressed that. I'm not going to get into that too much. Hopefully we can get a change in the future to look at a frequency or a measure that isn't just dBA, which uses a filter which essentially takes out low frequency sound, which is one of the big problems, and instead move to dBc, which allows the detection of low frequency sound as well. But low frequency noise can be mitigated. It's better if it's done during construction. You can use acoustical louvers. There's modified fan blades that can reduce tonal noise quite a bit. So there's ways to approach this that can be done, and those can actually be done post construction too. It's just a lot easier if you have it on in your initial construction. Okay, and then I want to talk about sort of the new thing as we talk about having a changing landscape. Large data centers generate more heat than an industrial blast furnace. Heat islands caused by data centers can raise temperatures with potential impacts on residents and other businesses. And this is especially concerning because a few extra degrees on a hot day can be lethal. It's relatively new on the radar screen. There was one study I talked with Dr. Marinoni, he's at Cambridge, who did the first study that was at least out in the press. His is still not published, but he saw very strong impacts on the temperature in areas surrounding data centers. And Arizona State University, theirs has been published and is available. They observed significant heat plumes radiating from data center cooling systems that affected communities hundreds of yards and up to a third of a mile downwind. So they basically went around in cars taking temperature measurements upwind and downwind of data centers. And most of the data centers they were looking at were small. What you have to realize is when you're looking at information on what impacts of data centers have been, even in Loudoun County, the average data center has been very small compared to the data centers that are looking to build here in Delaware. So heat is an issue. I can tell you I plan to introduce a bill that will not go forward, but I just want to get it out there as sort of a signal to data center developers that if you, so essentially it'll be if you're raising temperature 2 degrees during a heat emergency, you have to cease operations, which no data center will want to do. But it's a signal. It's meant to signal that before you start putting shovels in the ground and building, you have really better looked at what you're doing with your waste heat and what the impacts of that can be. So again, that won't be moving forward this year, and it'll need an awful lot of work, but it'll be a sign basically that if you think you can just come here, put up a data center as cheaply as possible and pump hot air out of the roof without taking into account potential negative impacts, you will be subject to being shut down because you'll be creating a life-threatening condition. So, but that brings us back to like these three things that all interplay with each other, and how this gets navigated. I don't think we should necessarily need to provide an answer to the data center developers, but I think we need to have standards on all of these. Noise is much greater with air-cooled data centers. Okay. If you vent your heat at rooftop level, it can easily drift over and impact neighborhoods. Air-cooled data centers are cheaper to build. They are less energy efficient. But air-cooled data centers do not use as much water. Liquid-cooled data centers still need to get rid of their waste heat, but can use a river, for example, as a heat sink. It also provides an opportunity to put waste heat to use. Again, it's not my job to tell a data center developer you know, ways they can try to utilize their waste heat in a productive manner. But it is my job to make sure they're not killing people in residential neighborhoods nearby. Okay, and benefits to Delaware. There's a strong showing for construction jobs, and this will probably be over several years. Relatively few long-term jobs for the same amount of energy used. The average for other industries is to employ 100 times as many people in permanent jobs as data centers would. This is really important. Over the next decade, electricity will remain a scarce resource. If it's a scarce resource, is this the best way to use it? Is there a significant opportunity cost? In other words, if we tell other industries that might be wanting to locate here, well, yeah, but you have to wait 8 years to get power. Is having a data center that's not going to employ many people in the long run a really good way to use that resource? And taxes, again, I'm going to echo what Councilman Carter said. Real, but not the huge windfall some have touted. I talked with Robert Wirtz. The vast majority of counter tax revenue from data centers is from the business personal property tax, not the land and buildings. And one of the reasons why I have no qualms about saying we can take things slow and get it right here is why data centers want to come to Delaware, and also why they are not going to run away if we make them shoulder their own costs and behave in an environmentally responsible manner. Delaware is a unicorn. There are two taxes that are really impactful on data centers. A large data center will spend tens of billions of dollars on computer equipment that it needs to update every 2 to 5 years. This is subject to sales tax in almost every state. Initial savings for a $10 billion of computer hardware is $500 million. And that's saved again every time the equipment needs to be upgraded. So that runs at about $100 million or more each year. This equipment is also subject to business personal property tax. Rates in the U.S. typically range between 1 and 2.5% on the asset's assessed value. So if you have $10 billion in computer equipment, that's $100 million per year. Several states have provided specific tax breaks for data centers in order to get them to come. For example, Virginia, one of the common ones has been to exempt data centers specifically from having to pay sales tax on buying their computer equipment. But many of those states have or are in the process of repealing or sunsetting those incentives, partly because they're looking at how much money they're losing by not taxing the data centers the way they tax other businesses. Here's some of the laws that have been amended or passed. Minnesota removed the sales tax exemption on electricity. Ohio included provision to end tax exemptions in their budget. Virginia was looking to tighten policies by phasing out exemptions for new data centers and setting a sunset date on existing incentives. Connecticut, they're looking to eliminate sales tax exemptions and roll back incentives, citing excessive energy demand. Again, every place where they've got these data center tax breaks put in place, there's a push to, and it's not necessarily successful, but they're considering and ongoing consideration to take away these tax incentives. And in Washington State, starting July 1, data center operators can no longer use tax exemptions for replacing or refurbishing older server equipment, though the exemption on new equipment remains in place. So again, it's a very it really de-risks the data center's business to come to Delaware in terms of these tax savings, because in other states they may have been given a special exemption, but those special exemptions are much more likely to be clawed back than Delaware is likely to start having a sales tax or put in place a business personal property tax. So those are the reasons why data centers will continue to want to come here. We can make sure that we uh, insist that they do so in a responsible manner. Um, so, changing tax law in Delaware requires a 3/5 supermajority vote of all members elected to each house in the General Assembly. That's constitutionally mandated. So the likelihood that Delaware will be imposing either of those taxes is very, very low. So Delaware de-risks a data center in regards to tax policy. Well, anyway, I'll stop there. And if you have any questions.
You guys just want to field these questions? Would that be good based on the hands up?
Sure. So Lisa, did you want to go first?
Hi, Dave. Thank you. I just wanted to add, I'm in everything that has been stated so far has made a lot of sense. I appreciate Councilman Dave for discussing setback requirements and noise protection for residents. This is the first time I'm really hearing about resident protection in a real way. What I've learned in Dover is suggestions that have been thrown around requiring special rates. I want to point out that 41 states are loosening or creating legislation for nuclear for a lot of the reasons you just said. I mentioned in Dover that any penalties to any data centers, and typically that would be dispersed among all energy customers. And I beg them to avoid that. I don't want to die on a hill for one Virginia county, but I want to point out that we discussed a lot of studies today from Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania. There's a lot more information than just that one county. And for nuclear and the SMRs, they provide grid safety, cybersecurity safety, cost. They use less water. They're mobile. And last but not least, I wanted to point out there's a certain type of data center, and I'll find it and put it in the chat. But there's a certain one that provides a very high corporate tax because they leave space within. And because we're a corporate tax state, I just wanted to point that out. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Dorsey?
Yes, I don't understand why there would be so much trouble in getting a huge vote against, because I mean, except for the actual construction, I don't see any benefits for us. In fact, I see the opposite. And I remember I was looking at I think I did a Zoom thing when you all were discussing this in the council. And there was a woman who tried to block everything that Dave and Kevin Kaneko wanted to do. And I just couldn't understand why.
Well, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of that push comes because the Delaware building trades, which make up 9% of our construction builders, donate a lot of money to campaigns and are a huge lobbying force. I mean, I was involved with Amy and Nick and others back when we were looking at Newark, and they were pretty vicious then, and they're pretty vicious now. I have a primary candidate from the building trades running against me now because of my data center ordinance. But it was the right thing to do. I work for the people. I don't take any money from developers. I don't take any money from special interests like unions. And I think it's got to stop. I think the data should dictate what we do. And the data to me was pretty damn clear. That said, I feel horrible for residents in and around the data center in Newark. Coastal zone isn't protecting them, and the legislators on county council that represent that area were amongst the biggest advocates for not doing anything, and they blocked us from the other stuff. So politics is a funny game. It was a hard fought, difficult battle. I know Dee stuck with me, Kevin stuck with me, Dave Tackett stuck with me throughout. I had others who flipped on me, and it's just a difficult game, and it depends on who you feel you want to serve and who you feel you're beholden to. And look, I got a pension. If I don't get reelected, then I don't get reelected. But I'll be damned if I'm going to change my point of view now because of a few special interest groups.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
must say I understand the union's point, but it's a very short term. The jobs are short term, and I gather that the jobs for these to run these things are tiny.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a combination of that, and quite frankly, it's a combination of a lack of understanding and a lack of research on what the financial benefits really are. I mean, I have been appalled, other than Stephanie Hansen and Frank Burns, I have been appalled at the level of collectively pulling their ignorance in our General Assembly about what we are going to get from data centers and what we aren't. The misinformation is just appalling. In the 11th district here, Representative Spiegelman and I have had it out. He'll be the first one to tell you, well, it doesn't matter if we don't do it here, it'll go to New Jersey, it'll go to somewhere else, and it won't affect our power at all. Well, do your damn homework. And it's just a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
Inexcusable, but a lack of understanding.
I'm going to say it's a willful lack of understanding, David.
Well,
I'm not-
I didn't quite go that far.
I'm gonna go that far. So you can, and I know this is being recorded, but no, it's absolutely true. And that's one of the things that they've tried to fight with me about on my legislation is trying to grandfather things. And there's no grandfathering in this. If you are connecting to the grid, you are held to this. And that's the same thing with the heat legislation I'm going to put forward. It has nothing to do with what your business is or when you built it or if it's in operation or going to be in operation. If you're heating up your a neighborhood next to you in a way that's putting life in danger, you have to shut down. And that I think will actually the threat of that, I think, will put a pause on several of the data centers that have been talked about so far, because I don't think any of them have any plans to mitigate or what to do with their waste heat at this point.
I'm next.
Sally. Yep. Sally.
Yeah. I want to say huge thank you to Councilman Carter and Representative Burns for the work that you are doing. It's just so critical. And I wanted to ask if it's possible to get a copy of your slides. I'd like to share them with the folks.
Sure.
Yes.
Jill, should I provide them to you and then you can get them out?
Do you want to take that?
Yep. We can do that. Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
then
thank you. That would be wonderful.
Dee and Jill, I'll get them to you, and
Okay.
I'll
And I'll
probably
get
do them
mine
in
as
black
well.
and white, so it'll be smaller, or grayscale will be smaller files.
Yeah. Is it okay if it's a PDF as opposed to a PowerPoint?
Yep, for
No,
sure.
that's
Okay, then
fine.
that
Yeah.
should be fine. Size-wise, I think I'm good then. Okay, Nancy Hannigan.
Thanks. So just a quick question. Dave, in the beginning of your talk, I think you mentioned that you wanted to grandfather some data centers, but
Yeah, so-
weren't successful in doing that. I don't have a feel for how many data centers there are.
Five.
Five?
Five.
Okay, and are any of them what would consider hyper?
Um, I would actually just about consider all of them. I think you're probably talking about the smallest being around 50 or 75 megawatts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I would like to just add in one of the reasons for the cutoffs that I have in my legislation is that since there is no grandfathering, there is no grandfathering of existing entities as well. So we have when you get down to the 50 megawatt level and start going below that, you start picking up you know, like the Moores Hospital, Christiana Hospital, the University of Delaware Star Campus, and things like that. So since this is retroactive and it's set on energy use level, we set it at 50, and then in order to not capture the Delaware City refinery, we have that uh, if if you're not if you're not constantly demanding it or demanding it 87% of the time, you can go up to 100 megawatts and be. David, do you know, are any of these less than 100 megawatts that have been proposed? I think that's the smallest I've seen.
I don't think so, but we can't get good numbers. They just came in with the substation revision to the Newark plans and were asked for the details, including that. And they were said, well, we're just going to have it be an accessory use. And thank God our land use manager, Dave Culver, said, the hell you will. You will tell me exactly what this substation is going to be and how much energy is going through it, because I got to determine and need that number because our code says we have to call it a major or a minor utility because that affects the way we read our code. So I don't think any of them. The Newark one might be a little bit smaller than a couple of others, and then the ones in the blue, what is it, the Blue Ball Industrial Park there, just north of where the Project Washington is, just because they're smaller buildings. They're about a 300,000 square foot building, but my guess is they're all over 100. But for us, what will happen at 25 megawatts is existing uses are grandfathered. If they change that or if they shut down and come back, they just become non-conforming uses under zoning. So they can continue with their operations as is. It's when they ask for another 25 megawatts that it kicks in under zoning.
Okay, Amy?
Frank, would you please talk about Senate Bill 312, which I see you are the House Prime, and I see has a hearing in administration on Wednesday. This is the bill about non-disclosure agreements.
Yes.
And before you talk about it, I just want to mention that in 2013, when Newark had our fight against the Data Centers LLC, we learned that they had signed a non-disclosure agreement with our city, and our city was aware of all the nitty-gritty for about 11 months before we found out about it. I don't know how many thousands of dollars we spent on Freedom of Information Act requests, but this non-disclosure agreement that happened was a real problem. And so I'm very, very glad to see this legislation.
Yeah. And I would say I have to give all the credit to that to Stephanie Hansen, because that was her. Well, actually, I have to take that back. Is that
Nicole.
Nicole Porsville?
Nicole.
That was Nicole who suggested that. I think it's a great piece of legislation, and it basically forbids local governments from entering into NDAs with developers, with data center developers, so that I think we need to go a lot further on, public access to information and it gets dicey, but I think also with Delmarva and the utilities, not just government entities. That's a fight we have to have, because right now Delmarva hides a lot of information that we really need to effectively plan things for the state. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And Fred and Gail?
First of all, thank you very much for your presentations. They're, as always, excellent. It's so nice to be on a peninsula where we're dangling off of capacity constraints and all that fun stuff and talking about nukes 15, 20 years from now as though they're here. But it makes me think fondly of Nancy Reagan. And I just want to ask you, just say no. To what extent these things, the 5 you just talked about, to what extent can we, for now, and until rules are in place, just say no and stop them?
I can tell you right now that I actually think the heat bill is sort of a backdoor way of putting a pause on things.
The 2 degree?
Yes.
I love it.
I think because think about it, it's very hard for the opposition to say, no, you should be able to heat up neighborhoods when there's a heat advisory or a excessive heat warning. That's an indefensible position for anyone to take in the legislature. So
Can you actually get that passed?
I will get a version of it passed, but I don't have time to draft a really solid bill. And the thing is, it doesn't require me to prove that data centers cause this type of problem. A lot of the issue is going to be, I've talked with DNREC, who is going to monitor this?
Yeah.
What's the enforcement going to be? There's a lot of details that really need a lot of time and energy to work out. And that can't happen before the end of this year. But again, it's sort of a shot over the bow that you need to really make sure you're doing something with your waste heat other than just dumping it on your neighbors. And I do think it's going to, there will be howling, but I don't think there's going to be any ability to get traction within, even the building trades are not going to be wanting to come out and say, yes, it's okay to make the temperature of the neighborhood go from 98 to 100 and, put people's lives at risk. That's an indefensible position. So that's why that's the route that I'm using on that.
Oh, you'd be surprised, I think, frankly.
Yeah, but if you can actually get that thing in place and then start an aggressive baselining, then the data will be there. And if the law is in place, then they're going to have to say, oh, I'm sorry, we're 2.5. Guess we're shut down.
Yeah. And I do think I'm hoping the choice will be to de-risk that they are going to actually do something other than just dump their waste heat. But, there is a trade-off of water use versus, because one of the things you can do with waste heat is use a lot of it to make water turn into steam, right? That uses up, and, also it has to do with, are you going to, and this gets into whether things fit in a heavy industry or just industrial use. So, do you need a cooling tower, right? Do you need some sort of a heat exchanger in a body of water that's got a lot of flow like the Delaware River? Do you need a heat exchanger? I saw a question in the chat. What is Project Washington? So I want to answer that as well. The Project Washington is the name for the data center proposed near Delaware City. Sorry. Did I answer your question, Fred, or?
Yes, but leveraging what you were talking about, on one hand, if they're going to generate a lot of heat, there should be, I'll call it cogen situations where they bring in industry that needs industrial heat. Because I think number is something like 20, 25% of energy usage is actually due to feeding industrial processes, because a lot of industrial processes need heat. If you were to go and take a look at the distillation systems that are going on at Delaware City, I'll bet it's going on there. But a separate question, if you dump it into rivers or the Delaware River or other bodies of water, what are the ecological, biological effects of that? And they're not trivial.
No, they're not trivial.
But it is regulated.
Yeah.
Thermal impacts
in what respect? What are the consequences if they kill the fish?
Bump. I will say
significant.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's
Thank you. I'll shut up.
No, what I think the real thing that you have to keep in mind is if you look across the river, you have two nuclear power plants. One of them has a smokestack, right? That's Hope Creek, and one does not, and that's Salem. Salem runs about 9 billion gallons of river water through its cooling system every day and has a big impact on aquatic life. Salem uses about 7% that amount of water, but that they're the ones with the cooling tower. So you've got an example there where, and even a large data center is not going to be dumping anywhere near the amount of heat into the Delaware that nuclear power plants do. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. I know we have some people who are very gung-ho pro-nuclear, at least one person on the call. But yeah, you need to be careful about the heat and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, the siting of cogeneration with these data centers is much more complicated than these committees realize, because we are pretty densely populated now, and it's going to be far more challenging than people realize.
Jill?
Just to reiterate, thank you. I'm just so pleased that we have such thoughtful and fact-based database folks thinking about what our future looks like. Tell me if I missed something, but the heat is obviously an issue. It also sounds like the extra cost for the congestion, for the cost of energy gets spread across people. And that would certainly drive me to think, that somebody's getting a lot of benefit, but I'm paying for it, which am I on target with that, or did I miss something?
No, you're on target. If we don't pass House Bill 233, that will definitely be the situation we will be in. And I can tell you, in discussions in drafting that bill with, I'm not going to say their name because I don't want to, I didn't ask them if it was okay to quote them, but they referred to the Project Washington proposal and what they were planning to do as abusive in terms of what it would do to electricity costs and electricity here in Delaware. So, again, you have a number of people in Delaware or I'll say in Dover, who think everyone's just putting spin on something. So no matter how fact-based you are, someone will convince them that, oh, they're just saying that because they're this or they're that.
There is no global warming. We all know that. So, Dorsey, are you up next?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say I never look at Facebook. I hate it, but I did happen to look at it when Project Washington suddenly changed its name. And I mean, I thought that was so dirty. So there were people making comments, oh, it's such a wonderful, oh, it's so patriotic, and we will get lots of taxes from them, and anyway, it was just, that name was done on purpose, and it was like that.
Did we get to all the questions in the chat? If any of you put something in the chat that we didn't quite cover, now's your chance to say it out loud.
Jason
Jason.
just popped in.
Yeah, Jason Hoover has a question.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry I'm late, but I'm glad I was here. And I'm going to rewatch it later. So an argument that I keep hearing is that we need to build the data centers here, because if they build them over the line because we're in the same grid, then we're going to have to pay increased electric costs anyway. So it's
Yeah.
better to have it here, because then we can regulate them from our laws. How much validity is in that argument?
None. Yes.
None.
You'll have to watch the recording, Jason.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They covered that
Sorry.
well. No, it's okay.
Great.
I'll send it to you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jason.
How about the question that I don't think you touched on, this is the feeling that these are kind of like logistics centers are going to be way overbuilt, and then we'll be stuck with these monstrosities in 10 years. Is there validity to that one?
Well, I do think,
Still get obsolete.
even I think if you look at what happened with the internet, right? It's changed the world. The internet changed the world. That didn't mean we didn't have a dot-com bubble that burst. So yeah, there will likely be some burst and consolidation. And I can't tell you about the hulking empty building side of this, but I can tell you that on the energy side, they're going to have to be bonded, and so that if infrastructure is built to try to provide electricity to these data centers, they are on the hook and they'll have to make good on it, even if they go under. So that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I had this conversation with the Delmarva Power staff and Public Service Commission. We're all very concerned about stranded cost if you start building these power and infrastructure and they don't go through, because and looking at it, NACO's looking at the National Association of Counties is looking at this right now, and our estimates are that upward of maybe 50% of them are still speculative, and they're just kind of throwing darts everywhere. So I think there's a real risk. The other issue that we're trying to get a handle on is, look, ships are going to get a lot more efficient. They're probably going to cool better. They're probably going to be smaller. And in 10 or 15 years, you think about, the size of what used to be able to get on a floppy disk just, 15, 20 years ago compared to what you can get on a thumb drive now. It's going to change significantly, and the entire size and structural need of those buildings is likely to change very significantly. It's just moving that fast.
Yeah, I think Amazon just announced something. They have started using a different network architecture called RNG in their data centers, which cuts power use by 40% and increases output by 30%. So this is not even a more efficient chip. This is a more efficient architecture for how the data centers, how the different nodes are connected, which I can tell you technically it was way beyond me because I'm not a graph theory person, but that's true. Things, and one breakthrough in quantum computing and all this goes away.
Yes.
So we really need to protect everyone from stranded costs.
So were there,
Fred, you had your hand up. Did we get your question?
Sort of. There's a side discussion I'm having with Amy about the whole question of Delaware City refinery. She's saying that they have net excess heat that they're dumping in the river, but I'm asking, is that because they're burning what could be product, could be petroleum products to generate that heat? Or is it just because the stuff that they're burning is totally unusable? And I really doubt that, because that would be like still bottom, which turn into asphalt.
They're not burning crude oil at the Delaware City refinery, and that's not the source of waste heat, and they're not burning product.
How are they generating the heat that is waste net heat?
How are they? You have a lot of experts on the once-through cooling system at the Delaware City refinery. So, Dave, I see you are very eager to say something.
Yeah. So they have a lot of sources of it. They even generate a certain amount of steam to keep the oil flowing. They're bringing in tar sands oil that you've got to heat up to bring through. So they generate some of it. All your cat crackers, everything generates a lot of heat. Your coker generates a lot of heat. So, and the real issue there is that they have been amazingly effective at blocking DNREC from really requiring them to upgrade and do the proper type of cooling system. For Christ's sake, if there's a place that should have closed loop cooling, it's at the refinery. They're bringing in water. Late summer, it has salt in it. It tears up their lines. It would be a lot cheaper. They got fish that run through that system and get beat the heck out of them all the way through the refinery, and then we jump them out into the end of a canal to suck them back in again, and then they extend to the chute that takes them out and beats them up even more, and they still get to suck them back in again. It's just been there just hasn't really been the political will to have them upgrade, and every time they talk about trying to force them to upgrade to what should be there, they talk about that'll force them to shut down, and then
DNREC has been really complicit in all of this, and instead of addressing the issue, they allowed them to install what they call modified traveling screens that just scoop the fish off of the front of the intake channel. It's fairly disgusting. I put a news article in the chat for you that has a nice quote in it from Dave. But that's from about 11 years ago. And this fight was very, very hot and heavy at the time because their water intake permit was up for renewal. And so that's the time to strike. But yeah, it's an ugly situation.
It's a real problem we have. I mean, we have the same problem with the nuclear power plant, and they basically did the PSC&G settlement, and essentially, in my view, it bribed a bunch of state agencies in Delaware and New Jersey to take millions of dollars for, I think, helpful, useful projects, but it sure as heck didn't offset the fish that are being killed in that thing, which dwarfs what our commercial and recreational fisheries combined harvest. So
I apologize for taking us wildly off topic.
That's okay.
I like Nancy Reagan, just saying.
Yeah. Well, and look, if we go to cogeneration on these data centers, we're going to be dealing with this all over the state, because you can't do cogeneration without serious excess heat and noise. And I don't know where you put that, and it's not close to people.
No, my point about cogen is
particularly in Newcastle County.
If you've got waste heat, there's industry that possibly we could attract to consume it. But it sounds like Delaware City Refinery should be the first candidate to have that next door.
Yeah, go ahead there.
Well, they want it next door so they can have all their diesel go over there to run those generators.
No, I said waste heat, not product heat.
Now there is a very real possibility that the refinery decides to diversify out of just refining and into energy production and provide the energy over there. And I don't think it'll be clean hydrogen. I think it will be likely to be something else, because they are a grandfather coastal zone site, so they could get a conversion permit to do something like that. We have a few sites. You've got a few sites in Claymont that would be eligible for conversion permits. Edgemoor is eligible for it. Those are all realistic. I don't know how realistic, feasible they are, but at least legally, other than that, you can't generate power in the coastal zone, and it's really tough in Newcastle County to generate power under our code.
why can't the heat be used? I mean, is it simply because it would be so expensive to pipe it somewhere? Because I mean,
Well,
we're now having geothermal looked into, and if this excess of heat is just being wasted.
so you've got to be really close. If you're building a data center in a city, you might be able to, and that city uses steam or something for heat. I know when they looked at the gas plant for the data center Star Campus, they were trying to work with the university to run that steam to heat the university at one point. So it's logistically, it's really hard unless you're adjacent to a direct user.
Thanks.
And quite frankly, when you're looking at some of this cooling water coming off, it's a lot of heat, but it's not always the type of steam that can spin a turbine to make energy or do other things with it. You'd have to heat it up again. And concentrating that heat could be done, but it's expensive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Friends, anybody in the chat that we missed? Okay. Dave and Frank, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, for being such stalwarts of doing the right thing in Newcastle County and in the state of Delaware. We are truly privileged to have you guys working on the side of all of us constituents. So one more reminder that we're going to do an in-person, which we haven't done since pre-COVID, an in-person Green Drinks on July 20th. Peggy Schultz, I think we'll miss you at that. You'll be somewhere else in the country. And we'll get a wrap up on what has happened as far as environmental kinds of legislation from Emily Nurl. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope to see you on our next event. So if you're out of state, look for us in August. Okay.
Okay, and I
Thank you.
sent you my slides,
so
Jill
much.
and Dee.
Okay, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Frank. We'll get it out. And
Okay.
Frank, if you can send me yours, we'll get it out to
Will
everybody.
do.
Yep. Okay.
Have
Thanks
a
a
great
lot.
night.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.